Establishing Quality with Brian Lagunas.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host for helping you and your teams move fast, deliver quality, and to run your software with confidence in Azure, all while using everything that is in the .NET ecosystem. The podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a software architecture company empowering software development and doing that through its ClearMeasure way for effective software teams. A quick announcement, my architect forums are going strong. Signups for the next session are up. There's a link in the show notes. If you lead a software team or a lead architect or in some element of software development leadership and you want to collaborate with peer architect leaders, then just go ahead and sign up and we'd love to see you there. And if you're looking for the video podcast Programming with Palermo, then just search in any of the podcast directories or on YouTube and you'll be able to find it. Now, my returning guest on the show is Brian Lagunas. He was with us back in show 228, and he's a Microsoft MVP, a Microsoft Patterns and Practices champion, a leader of the Boise .NET Developers User Group. He's a board member of Boise Code Camp. He's a speaker, trainer, Pluralsight author, and he can be found speaking at a variety of developer events around the world. His talks seem to always involve some sort of markup, XAML or HTML, as well as how to build well-architected applications with Prism. And in his spare time, he authors courses for Pluralsight, he blogs, he live streams around various technologies, creates tons of videos, and manages the Prism library. And the easiest way to find Brian is on Twitter at Brian Lagunas. That's BrianLagunas. Brian, welcome back to the show. How are you, sir?
I am great. Thanks for having me again. It's always fun to have these type of conversations with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were able to see each other in person just, time flies, a few short weeks ago or a few months ago at the Microsoft MVP Summit. That was a great steak dinner too.
Oh, that was awesome. That was a good find, by the way. I don't know if you Yelped that one with the 5-star reviews, but that was a really good restaurant you found there. But yeah, MVP Summit was awesome. You know, it hasn't been in person for, 3 or 4 years, way too long. And I'm just so happy they did it in person again because there's just nothing like it. There's not an event like it. It's just not the same when they do it online. It's got to be in person.
Right. And I don't know if there's only one good steakhouse in Redmond, but when we're eating dinner and Phil Hack just shows up and Scott Hunter just shows up because they picked the same spot and then we end up talking for way too long. That was fun too.
Yeah, it's always good when you pick a restaurant and then you're sitting down eating and everyone shows up and now your group of 2 becomes like a group of 6, you know?
Yeah, it's good stuff. Well, before we get too far into it, there's probably listeners out there who haven't seen your YouTube channel or your Pluralsight videos, or they might not live in Boise and go to the Boise .NET user group. Just quick introduction. You've been doing development a long time, but as opposed to going back your whole history, what are just some of the recent high points that have shaped your way of thinking about software beyond just getting code to work and more towards in what you're doing is currently leading software teams?
Yeah, well, actually, I'm fortunate because when I first started my real development job at a big corporation of 60,000 employees worldwide, and I was on a development team that wrote apps for, the name of the company was, URS. And they were basically a global infrastructure company, construction company. So they built like nuclear power plants, bridges, dams, military bases, all that stuff. I mean, huge projects. And so the software I worked on was extremely important. And I was fortunate enough to have a great mentor when I first, started on actually building real enterprise software. Before that, it was always like websites for like realtors or small mom and pop shops, things like that. But when I got that gig working for that huge construction company, that's when my eyes really opened to enterprise grade software that has to be reliable, like 99.9999% uptime, truly mission critical. And so I was lucky to have a mentor who really taught me about architecture more than anything. He's like, code doesn't really matter. The architecture of what's most important on these systems. And once you have the architecture figured out, then you can start writing your code.
Mm. Yeah, that's a good point.
My mentor was really heavy on architecture and just making sure your foundation was right. And the way he put it was, we work in a construction company. When you build something, you want to build something on a solid foundation.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have a solid foundation, it's going to crumble. So we want to start with a solid foundation. And then that's my whole career. That's how my mindset has been: solid foundations. So I'll spend so much time making sure I have my architecture correct before I really get into writing the meat of the code, just to make sure my foundation is solid.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then sometimes you realize, I need to add some more, quote, runes to this software, but you don't have the right structural support in that area.
Exactly. So I was fortunate to have that mentor, and that really set off my entire career path and the way I think and the way I develop software. It's not like today. I think from what I see, anyways, my exposure, I can't speak for everyone because, the world is big, but the exposure that I see from today's developers, it's very, very, very fast, very loose, not a lot of emphasis on making sure your architecture's right. It's, I don't know, it's a little different. You go to a boot camp and now you're a developer and, making $100,000 a year, did 6 weeks of a boot camp or something. Like, it's just, I don't know. That's just my perception. It could be different. It could be completely wrong. I'm completely wrong. But from where I'm sitting, that's kind of where I see today's development mindset, I should say. Copy and paste from Stack Overflow, the ChatGTP, generate the code for me type stuff. I really don't see a lot about, architecture and making sure your systems are set up right. And, how do you build a Spotify? How do you build a Netflix? How do these systems scale? I don't really see a lot of people talking about that nowadays. So it's interesting.
Yeah. Or pull back away from that. How about just building an application that doesn't go down for 30 seconds when everybody logs in on Monday morning? And everybody means maybe only 100 people.
Yeah.
There's a couple: Netflix, Spotify, Twitter. I mean, there's a few of those in the world, but then there's thousands and thousands of other applications that maybe they only need to support 1,000 people, not 1,000,000.
Yep. And even those systems have trouble, being reliable, not crashing, not going down, not, being stressed and not being able to scale and handle the traffic, right?
So that's a whole different mindset of, hey, we got a project, we need to finish this project, there's a deadline, let's go. Or maybe we have an existing system and there's new feature. That's a whole different mindset of, hey, this thing needs to work. This thing needs to not break. Or when we change something, we don't need to push out, new and novel bugs into production to be found later. So how do you balance or reason about those competing maybe pressures from the outside?
Well, it's interesting because of my mindset, I think it actually aligns pretty well with the Clear Measure way. I looked at the Clear Measure way. I'm just curious, like, what does Clear Measure do? And I'm looking at your Clear Measure way and I'm like, you know what? This is actually really close to how I think already. And so, when I come onto a new project, like, for example, let's talk about what I'm doing today. In the past 5-6 months, I was brought on to a team it's an existing team, been around a while, working on a product, and they haven't had great success. And so one of the first things I like to do is focus on establishing quality. And that could mean different things to different people, but it's like you said, let's not release bugs into production. That's part of establishing quality. What are you doing to mitigate those risks? And I take it a step further because my old school mindset is I like to see the code structure on disk cleaned up to where it's easy to structure, navigate, and maintain the code base as it exists on disk, right? So I like to clean up my code structure, my file structure. I want to make sure that everyone can do a private build locally. Like, can you build the product locally? Can you just do a, pull from your repository and build?
Mm-hmm.
What's the architecture look like? Do you have any static analysis in place? Can you do continuous integration? Do you have automated builds? Acceptance tests? Do you have? What do you got in place to ensure that you are delivering quality first? Because from my experience, is that you can waste a lot of time working on bugs.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of time. And there's a handful of categories where you're spending time, where you spend your time, right? That could be working on the software. You spend time diagnosing, fixing, reworking bugs or defects and things like that. Diagnosing your software as it runs on production. You got to do that, spend time doing that. Then you have administrative non-dev work, non-software work. You might have tech debt you have to deal with. And of course, the thing that everyone forgets about that I'm actually being impacted right now by is vacations, time off.
Yeah.
Right. So, but the bulk of where you waste the most time, the biggest time suck is bugs, defects. And so if you can eliminate or at least severely limit the amount of time you're spending there, now your productivity and all these great things that the higher ups and the stakeholders want to see, now those become more visible because you can actually spend time on those things that are more visible versus the internal tech debt bug fixing stuff.
Yeah. You mentioned inheriting a team or taking over leadership on a team. I don't know if you measured this or if you have just a sense, what percentage of the team's working time was fixing problems with the software versus working on new capabilities? Do you have any sense for that?
Yeah, I would say I can only speak for myself in my environment.
Mm-hmm.
When I initially took over the team, we were probably spending about 80 to 90% on internal tech debt bug fixing, regressions, constantly having regressions. Those big, awesome features that actually move the needle and help you sell product, those weren't happening as quickly or as often as we'd like because we have existing customers that are being blocked or impacted, or maybe you have a POC from sales who's trying to sell a new license, but they hit a blocker because of this bug.
Yeah.
And so they can't even schedule the POC because this bug is blocking the potential sale. So you got to drop everything, fix that bug, get sales a build so they can do their demo and sell the product.
Yeah.
And so, it's.
Wow. So 20% or less of the capacity of the team actually being able to work on new stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I'm being generous too, honestly.
So how do you, and I bet you there's listeners out there that are saying, that's my world. That's my life right now. I'm just spending all my time just chasing problems. How did you start making a dent in that? Just start with education, skills? Was it a strategy around a certain type of problem? How do you even think about getting started with putting quality back as a priority?
The first thing I had to do is I had to assess where our problems were. What do we have? How do people work? How do our developers work today? I met with all of them doing, we have we have a morning sync. Every morning we have a sync. Then I did one-on-ones with each team member. I talked to the team leads, asking questions about, what do they think is blocking them?
Yeah.
What can I do to help make their job easier? Is it tools? Do they need equipment? Do they need services? What do they need to be more efficient? What do they identify as problems themselves? So it probably took 4 weeks, at least, a month, maybe a little more, to get a grasp of, where our issues were. And then I start at the source. I start with our repo. Okay, what's our branching strategy? Do we have one? Do we have any type of CI/CD in place? Do we have testing in place? I start seeing what we have in place. Okay. Now, because we have limited time, you can't just do it all at once. You have to create a long-term plan on what do you think is more important, right? And it's going to be based on your team, what you find most important, but you're going to pick one of those things and you say, okay, you know what? We can do builds manually. Yeah, it sucks. But what's most important is making sure we're not getting regressions out. So let's focus, on getting our tests in place first. Once we can get our tests and we have confidence in our software and confidence in the changes we're making, once that's in place, okay, now let's go and start doing some continuous integration stuff, some automated builds. And, so now it's just about prioritizing what you work on next to get you to that long-term path. And in my mind, I think very long-term. When I took over this team, I'm like, okay, in 3 years, I want to be here.
Mm-hmm.
In a year, I want to be here, 2 years here, right? I have a long-term plan. And so everything I'm thinking about doing is towards that plan. Up front, you're like, why are you doing this first? Doesn't it make sense to do this? Well, if you're thinking short term, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're thinking down the road, we want to do it this way, right? And so that's essentially the approach I took when I first took the team over.
Okay. And was everybody rearing to go? Were they all aligned saying, yeah, that's awesome? Or was there any convincing certain mindsets?
Oh no, there was definitely some resistance in the beginning because people they get used to working a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
They wake up, they have the routine, they work a certain way, they know what to expect. This is how it's done. This is how we always do it, is what they say. But then when you start introducing change, us as humans, we're kind of resistant to change anyways. We get comfortable in whatever we do. And anything change comes up, we get uncomfortable and we're like, okay, what's going on? Why are we doing this? And there's this pushback and they're like, oh, we've always done it this way. And why are we doing this way? But once, you get past those initial conversations and you can show them that these changes you're making are actually improving the product, then the light bulbs come on and then they start, getting into their new routine. They start getting into the new way of doing things and they start realizing, oh, this is more efficient. I am more productive. Our software is more stable. Our customers are actually giving us compliments now. And holy crap, we sold way more licenses than we ever have, right? And so those things start showing over time.
Many thanks to our podcast sponsor, ClearMeasure. ClearMeasure is a software architecture company that empowers clients' development teams to be self-sufficient, moving fast, delivering quality, and running their systems with confidence. Whether starting a new project or developing new technologies or techniques, ClearMeasure sets up your team to deliver world-class results. Learn more at www.clearmeasure.com. ClearMeasure, empowering software delivery. ClearMeasure is also happy to be a sponsor of the video podcast, Programming with Palermo. Watch, learn, and program alongside Chief Architect Jeffrey Palermo. Videos are added weekly and available on syndicated locations supporting video podcast or by visiting palermo.network. Tune in today.
So you mentioned the actual results start becoming evident. How do you measure the actual progress? Are there actual numbers that you have on a scorecard, or how do you have something concrete versus, well, I think that we're getting better?
That can be very difficult to measure. One thing that I find that the higher ups, the stakeholders, the CEOs, all the suits, if you can show them money increase, you've made an impact, right? So on my team, we have sold more licenses in the last 5 months than they have since the product released.
Oh, wow.
Right? We're on track for 1.2 million in sales in record time. And so to the higher ups, they're like, holy crap, I don't know what you're doing, but keep doing it, right? Do more of that. Then internally with our own systems to see that we're doing the right things is, do we have more regressions? Are our regressions, decreasing? What are our bug reports? I can look at when bugs were logged in past months compared to how often bugs are being reported now. And yeah, steady decline. We have a huge decline in bug reports. Our testing, we can see that we're finding more internal bugs because, we have our public bug system and then we have our internal bugs. And so I have reports that show our internal bugs are increasing. Some people say, oh, that's a bad thing. I say that's a great thing because that means our testing and our systems are finding this before we release them into the wild.
Yeah, the bugs were there.
Yeah, the bugs are there. It's just who's going to find them first. And I'm super excited when we find them first. And that just shows that our processes are working because we are not putting more bugs into the wild. We are not getting these regressions. We are finding them before they go out. And that's just all part of our processes that we're putting in place.
Okay, so if I heard you correct, you look at the number of bugs being found before it goes to the customer versus bugs being found because of a customer.
Yes. Another thing I look at is that's just bugs, but then you look at, okay, what kind of features are we getting now? Right. So bug count is way down now. Public bug count is way down. Now, are we able to work on features? I can compare it to past releases, past release notes, past sprint backlogs, and say, okay, how many feature items are on this backlog versus, and you kind of got to gauge it because some features are bigger than others. So there's some leeway there, but you kind of interpret that as like, in the past, we were probably averaging like one feature a release. Now we're getting 6. Okay. That's a huge increase in features that we're getting, right?
Yeah.
So you're seeing your bugs go down, your public reported bugs are down, your features are up. Now you have your CI/CD pipelines in place and things are starting to work, and you're like, okay, we're running smooth, right? Less problems are coming up in your sync meetings where people are like, oh, this big issue came up or this came up. You have less of those, less surprises, less tech debt. So it's really like you got to take a lot of inputs, and what I will deduct from that information will be different than what someone else in their company will see, right? It's a little, what's the word I'm looking for?
Gut feel?
Subjective.
Subjective, yeah.
It's a little subjective, right?
Sure. So your subjective instinct or your subjective opinion after over 2 decades in the industry is going to be pretty darn good at this point. There's value to that.
We've been doing this a while, so we kind of get a feeling for how things, are or should be. Based on past experience, you have a pretty good idea of how you're doing.
Yeah. You mentioned continuous integration, and I think there's so much talk about continuous integration. And of course, you've got the build servers that are just trying to sell build server licenses. And I mean, even Azure pipelines, all the getting started samples are, okay, here you go, trigger a Git repository. Oh, what are we going to compile? And now we have continuous integration, but you've already gotten good results. What are the quality controls that you credit for that? Besides just, okay, let me trigger some compiles, let me trigger some builds and packaging. What are the quality controls that you've put in place that you kind of link back subjectively, but you link back and say, okay, those are critical path. If we hadn't put those steps in place, we'd still be sending more bugs to the customer.
Yeah. Well, first, testing.
You can define test. Like, what does that mean? Unit testing? Like, how many? There's like 18 different types of testing.
There's so many different types of testing. You have unit test. You have integration test. You have UI automated test. All those testing differences, they all build up to a test strategy. Even when I did define, okay, well, we have automated test, UI automated test. What are we going to automate? What's going to be covered in a unit test versus a UI automation test? Where do we spend time doing integration tests? Where's the critical path on integration tests? Those types of things. So testing's super important. Now, there's different opinions on testing. Some believe TDD is the only way, test-driven development. Write your test first, a failing test, then you start iterating on your code to make it pass, and that's how you do it. And that's fine. I don't personally believe in TDD, but I do believe in tests. It's only because I don't believe tests should drive your design. That's a whole different show.
Mm-hmm.
But I do believe in tests. So if anything is test during development, right? Mm-hmm. I could totally do that.
Did I hear you guys use feature branches and pull requests?
Yes. So that's another part of it is we do have feature branches. So creating a good branching strategy. In my mind, the main branch,
mm-hmm.
you never commit to directly, and it's always in a releasable state. At any point, you can release from it, right? So that's like the pristine, always ready to go branch. Then you'll have your vNext branch, if you will. That's the branch where all your PRs merge into, right? So you'll have a feature branch. Someone works on the feature, they merge into the vNext branch or whatever you want to call it. And then all your tests and everything are validating and running on that. Usually your builds will go out to some type of staging environment that mimics production, but you want to be able to make sure that what you're committing to your vNext, not only is it passing your CI/CD pipeline, all your tests are running, automation, unit, integration, but you'll also want to be able to have packages so you can manually test and validate, that your packages are being created properly. And then once everything looks great, then you can do a merge into your main and create a release branch off that, and now, release out to production.
That's a good point. You mentioned packages, and in your product, the customers pull latest version of your packages via NuGet or NPM. And so that's the delivery mechanism. And so not only do all the features have to work right, but if there was any kind of bug that cropped up in the packaging or the process of doing a package update into the customer's Visual Studio solution, you got to cover that stuff as well, because that's part of your software's experience.
Exactly. And we just found an issue because Microsoft, in an updated version of their SQL client, they made a breaking change. So our dependency, not our code, but a dependency that we have on a SQL client had a breaking change in it. And so, all our tests passed, everything worked great. Our product is beautiful. We create our packages, and then we test our packages, and then, we test an upgrade path, and boom. Oh, wait, what happened?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we upgraded this dependency and it broke. Oh, what dependency was that? And then you start researching, and then, okay, what broke? And then we found out it was a change to an enum or something like that.
Wow.
And so, it's very, there's a lot to it.
Your products go back so long. Like, you've got historical technology and whatnot. And Microsoft is known for, like, even stuff that integrates with COM, some of the old wrappers, they'll fix a bug in the 32-bit version, but the 64-bit version still has the same bug. So unless you're testing all the various scenarios your customer may run into, you've got a gap.
Yeah, and it's hard to catch those, and sometimes you don't catch them,
Yeah. So I'm kind of channeling some of the listeners, because we have so many listeners out there who maybe they've done a few unit tests, but they can't even visualize what this type of thing looks like, because you're talking about all these different types of tests, and they're looking at their code and they're like, how do I even write a test around this? What kind of skills did you have to strengthen, and how did you go about doing that just to make this type of testing coverage possible?
Yeah, well, testing is something that you're always working on. I think testing skills is something you're continuously improving. APIs are always changing. New test frameworks are always coming out. But testing is definitely an area that I don't think a lot of devs have a lot of experience in, right? They might not even know the basic arrange, act, assert type acronym that you get, the 3 A's of testing, right? And they don't even know, the naming conventions. It's important to have naming conventions for tests. And what are those? What does your company use? And there's all these things around testing. So in general, I would send videos, video training to my team. It's like, look, here's some videos I think we could all benefit from. So let's start here. Here's some blogs. Here's some books. Here's content to start learning about testing and how it's done, the different types of tests, what we need to think about. Then you start learning about setting up environments and things like that. And and we're a small team, so we don't have a DevOps engineer, for example, right? We have to learn how to set up our own pipelines, our own CI/CD stuff, right? So, and I'm sure a lot of people listening here, they're like a small team,
right?
You might have 2 people responsible for all this stuff, right? I'm lucky to have a team of 8, but it's still a challenge for sure. And so it's important you have at least some good senior people in place to help mentor the less senior people. And, on my team, we all learn from each other. We have our junior people teaching the senior people stuff, but you got to be open to that communication, right?
Yeah. Now, you mentioned doing feature branch. I want to hear about the pull request process, because there's a lot of people that hear, oh, do feature branches, oh, do pull requests. And, the mechanism is just, oh, what's a pull request? You click a button and it merges it back into a branch that it came from. But what's your process around that? Have you imposed any standards by which a pull request is approved, or who does it? How do you think about pull requests?
Yeah, so this is where we're working. we haven't got here yet, but we're still working on this strategy. And so right now we're just getting pull requests. That's the basic.
Mm-hmm.
I want a pull request. And then today, my team will have the senior lead engineer. He reviews all pull requests before being merged into our VNext branch, right? Well, what the next step in our iteration of improvement is now we're going to start putting checks in the pull request, like little check boxes. Like, I don't know, a lot of people may not know this, but maybe you do. But when you in Markdown, you can actually have like a little checkbox template, right? So when you submit a pull request, it can't be accepted unless these checks are checked off.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have unit tests? Has this been reviewed by anyone? You can put rules in place. Maybe was FX cop run? I don't know, just whatever you want to come up with. You have these check items, this checkoff list, and you can look at that PR and make sure that all those have been checked off before merging. And also, there's always a reviewer on every PR, and it's always going to be one of the lead dev architects that will review and do the actual merging.
Okay. And is your Git repository on GitHub?
Nope, we're in Azure DevOps.
Okay. So I think you're talking about the pull request template. I think both of those do it slightly differently, but you have to, a specially named Markdown file in a special directory, and then it'll pick it up. So
and then you start putting in, static analysis tools. Maybe you have to test for like accessibility, any type of inspections you have to do. I don't know, integration tests. We talked about full system acceptance testing, things like that, formal inspections, just that type of stuff, right?
So tools isn't as important as the process, but
right.
You mentioned static analysis. Which static analysis tools do you find dropped in pretty easily? And are there any particular rules or rule sets that maybe listeners should check out? Because they could drown in a sea of static analysis rules, but how have you waded through that ocean?
I haven't actually got to that point yet. I'm not at that phase in our planning yet, in our process improvements. But when I get there, we can talk again, and I can tell you which ones I'm using and why, and what to look out for on those.
For sure. Yeah, that's very much in flux. There's some things like continuous integration that there was a book published in 2006 called Continuous Integration, and there hasn't been a book since that has supplanted that one because it was so good and the dust has settled on the different stages of it. Now the products are codifying it. But static analysis is definitely up in there where, there's tools everywhere and there's rule sets everywhere, but there's so much still movement. The dust has not settled on that yet.
Yeah. And I mean, even now, there's so much new tooling out that I haven't even had a chance to look at yet that will probably just help improve quality even more, right? I've heard of a lot of new tooling coming out, and I haven't seen how I could take advantage of them yet, but I'm hoping to when I get to that point in the process improvement plan.
Okay. And just to close out, besides the number of bugs slipping through, just emotionally and experientially, has your team noticed that they're spending more time on feature development and less time fighting fires, or is that still early?
Yeah, well, you talk about the emotional side of things and how people feel about their work. I think it's important to highlight one thing that I did immediately as part of meeting with the team one-on-one, understanding their, where they're happy, where they're struggling, and kind of how they see them growing their careers, is making sure people were in the right places. There were areas of the team that were not great, to put it frankly. It wasn't great, right? But it was only because these people weren't put where they should be, right? No one talked to them and asked them about their passions, what they're interested in, and all their what they think are their strongest skill set.
Mm-hmm.
And so, just by moving people around, the morale of the team was increased. Just people were happier with the work they're doing. They felt better with their work. It's like they really started enjoying what they did. And once your morale starts to raise, and then they start seeing the improvements in the processes, and they feel comfortable with the new processes you've put in place, and they see the changes, they see the new sales, they see the raises that are coming because we're making more money on the product. now morale is way up, and that sense that sometimes developers on a team, maybe they don't feel like they have a voice or they don't really have power to make change.
Mm-hmm.
Well, on my team, the culture I'm trying to build is everyone has a voice. Everyone is a contributing member of this team. And so if you see something, say something, right? And now people, they're voicing their concerns more. They're like, hey, I think we can improve this area here. Have you thought about that? And I'll say, dude, I didn't even know about that. Thanks for bringing that to my attention, right? And so you really empower people to start making decisions on their own and start, feeling like they're actually contributing to the team. They feel better about what they do. And so, yeah, morale is way up just by doing that, putting people where they like to be.
Nice. Yeah, because some developers love slinging code that happens to be automated testing code, but it's a heck of a lot of programming. And then other people just love getting into algorithms or calling into third-party systems. Yeah, everybody has different things that just click.
Yeah, for sure.
That's a good point. Well, man, this is great. You could probably talk for another hour on this, but I think the listeners probably got a lot of value out of this. And I just know that so many people out there are struggling with buggy systems, or maybe, it seems right in the test environment, but we go to production and there's just problems keep coming to the surface, and we're working support tickets and bug reports, and we just want to work on new stuff, but we're just wading through the old Fred Brooks tar pit of software from the past that never really got finished properly. So important. Good work.
Yeah, no, that tech debt is a huge pain in the ass. It will weigh you down.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, hey, I appreciate you coming back on the show and sharing with us about how you're establishing higher quality in your team and leading them. Man, leadership is just so important because you chose, we need to focus on quality as opposed to, hey, we got a deadline, we got this feature, new feature. So,
yeah. And there's another aspect to that. I mean, like you said, we could talk forever, but it's back to, how do you tell the stakeholders and the VPs and the CEOs and all the suits, like, no, we can't do that right now. We have to focus on this. And this is why, right? Because they want the features.
Right.
But you need to tell them why you can't focus on the features right now. It's like, no, we need to spend the next 2 months just on bugs.
Yeah.
Right. And convincing them to make that happen.
But 2 months goes by quick, and then stuff happens that they do care about, and they're realizing, oh yeah, I do like what you did.
Yep. It's a little harder to convince them. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, Brian, hey, thanks for coming back on the show and sharing with us. This is great.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Always a good time to come talk with you, Jeffrey.
Definitely. My pleasure. And until next time, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.